Good evening, and thank you for attending tonight's Economic Development 101 hosted by the City of Gahanna and the Economic Development Department. For those of you who are live streaming at home, thank you for taking some time out of your evening to join us tonight. And for those of you who are here in person, thank you for coming on in this evening. I heard the weather was great today, so appreciate you spending some of your evening here with us. You know, as I mentioned, tonight's conversation is a discussion on economic development and specifically economic development here in Gahanna. A key priority for me upon taking office 2 years ago was to pursue smart economic development. So I don't know what that means to you, but what that means to me is economic development that makes sense for our city, development that meets a need that we have in our city, development that meets a need of the business community, development that has a positive impact for us, and development that sets our city up for future success for many, many years to come. But in order to fully engage in what a discussion of what smart economic development is, we really need to have a discussion of what is economic development and what is not economic development, because sometimes that's not always clear. We also need to understand how economic development happens in the city and within our region. How do we retain and expand the businesses that have chosen to invest here in our city? How do we attract new businesses here? What do we need to have here in Gahanna that is different from any other community in Central Ohio that is going to make a new business bring jobs here to Gahanna versus anywhere else? How does economic development play into maintaining the vitality of our community? And how do we create opportunities to expand our tax base? In order to answer those questions, we need to have a better understanding of how all of those goals meld together and depend on one another for success. So tonight, I, along with members of my administration, have invited some key industry leaders and experts from the Ohio economic development community to join us for a discussion on those questions and those topics. With us tonight, from the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, the Director of Planning and Sustainability, Dr. Kirsten Carr. She will talk about the growth that is happening in the region and all around us. What are the current trends, what is expected to occur in the coming years, and how that will impact Gahanna. Then we will hear from Justin Bickle. Justin is the Managing Director of Client Services and Project Management for One Columbus. He also is a former Gahanna resident, so he offers a really unique perspective on why it is Gahanna needs to be part of that regional growth and what do we need to do to maintain our competitiveness with all of the other communities that are vying for the same businesses and the same jobs that we want to bring here. And then finally, we will hear from our newly appointed Director of Economic Development, Nate Strum, who will talk about what his office has been experiencing in the 6 months, 7 months that you have been here, and what we have done to date to really take advantage of those opportunities of economic development to meet the demands that we have here in our city. So if you'll join me in welcoming, first to the podium, from the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, Dr. Kirsten Carr.
Thank you, Mayor, so much for inviting me to be here. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I hope Councilwoman Angelou is looking from afar because she's our chair at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission and a great advocate and partner in a lot of the work that we are doing. And I'm really excited to talk about Central Ohio's growth, where we've been and where we're going. So first, I just wanted to check in how many of you know who MORPC is, or the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Most of you, that's amazing. Yes, so very short, we are essentially a chamber of commerce, but for local governments. We have about 75 members. It's on the next slide. Oh, I need to do that. I got it. We have about 75 members. Those are all local governments and serve this 15-county region that you see here on the map. We support our local governments through a bunch of different programs and sometimes even funding in the realms of transportation, sustainability, planning, data and mapping, legislative affairs, and also community and engagement. Our mission is really to figure out how can we help our communities, our members, like Gahanna, to improve the quality of lives for their residents. And a major part of our work is really to figure out how many residents will come and be in Central Ohio over the next coming years. And at this point, our data estimates that Central Ohio is on track to become a region of 3 million people by 2050. So much of the population growth is expected to be within those 7 counties that you see to the right here. Growth is certainly not new for Central Ohio. We've been growing significantly over the past decades, as you can see here, and we're expected to not really slow down much. Growth isn't just about people, it's also about homes and it's about jobs to support them. And as you can see, we're expecting a substantial increase in the number of households and jobs in our region as well. So recently, the Census 2020 data was released at the sub-state level, and our data team went right to work and crunched the numbers. And so what they found was that Central Ohio, over the past decade, 2010 to 2020, grew by nearly 240,000 people, which means that they ranked 27th in growth among 400 metro areas in the United States. So this is significant and really strong growth. We also had very strong urban growth. The city of Columbus grew by more than 100,000 people within that time frame and actually ranked 9th among other metro areas, metro cities within that area. Columbus was the only Midwestern city that grew by more than 100,000 people. But growth is not the story across Ohio, unfortunately. Most of the state's 88 counties actually lost population during the past 10 years. In fact, whereas Central Ohio added nearly 240,000 people, the rest of the state added only about 26,000 people. So Central Ohio is really a success story in the state. And we have a very symbiotic relationship with the state. When you think about natural growth, which is basically people being born here, more birth in a community than death, natural growth has been steadily declining as birth rates decline, so our growth is increasingly reliant on attracting people to come to Central Ohio. So this is what migration growth comes from. And people moving here from other places makes really up a big chunk of Central Ohio's growth. And this past decade, the first ever decade, was when as much growth happened from migration as it happened through natural growth. And of that migration, about half of it is domestic and the other half is international. And of the domestic growth, 80% is people coming from other parts of Ohio into Central Ohio. So the health of our growth is directly tied to the healthy growth in the rest of the state. So even though growth has been typical for Central Ohio, it's not guaranteed. We know that factors can change, what we've learned over the past 18 months. And so the events of 2020 and 2021 are certainly unprecedented in just about every way, and that also includes population changes. So when you look at that chart on the screen here, you can see that in Central Ohio, we experienced a slowdown of migration, an even further reduction in birth rates, and unfortunately a tragic increase in death rates as a result of the pandemic. And so despite these unprecedented circumstances, Central Ohio still collectively increased population by around 10,000 people, but it is much less than the previous years before. We still believe that even with that slowdown during this past year, we are still on track to become a region of 3 million people, what I showed earlier. As our team makes projections in terms of growth here in Central Ohio, they always take into account faster and slower pace of growth. They don't know exactly what will precipitate that, if it is a pandemic or economic slowdown or success, but they know that we always have those type of phases as we grow as a community. So what does all of this mean for the region's housing market? One thing that we all know, either because you experienced it yourself, you know it from friends or neighbors, or anecdotally, Central Ohio's housing market has been intensifying for a year. It's similar to across the nation as well. And so there are a few factors that kind of relate to this. But a big one is that we've been underbuilding for at least a decade. And so to illustrate that further, in the 2000s, we added 100,000 housing units for every 240,000 more people, which is about 1 for every 2.4 people. In the 2010s, we added 80,000 housing units for every 240,000 more people, which is about 1 for every 3 people. So when you think about the average household size being 2.4 people, you know that we are simply not building enough to go around. Following the Great Recession, we were able to kind of balanced the deficit by returning about 14,000 vacant units back onto the market, but now that supply is mostly absorbed. And so that underproduction is putting a lot of pressure on price points. And then the pandemic occurred in that time as well and put additional pressures on the housing market and the competition for homes. And that was then compounded with low interest rates and a desire to maybe have a different living style as people were thinking about remote work and making their home work for that lifestyle. Specifically to COVID, what were the impacts on our local market? And so our data team took a look at Zillow data. And what it tells us is what was the average monthly increase in home value previous to the pandemic and after the pandemic. And so for the region at large, we went from average monthly home value increases of about $650 in cities in the area before the pandemic to average increases of nearly $1,700 in the month since the pandemic began. So that's almost tripling that monthly increase. 96% of cities in the region saw at least some acceleration in home value increases. And so as we zoom into Gahanna, we see that home values on average were increasing faster than the region's average, both before and since the pandemic began, really indicating that you have a pretty hot housing market here already. So Gahanna had monthly average home value increases before the pandemic of about $1,000, which is already $350 more per month than the region's average. And then since the pandemic began, home value increases are close to $2,800 each month in Gahanna, which is $1,100 higher than the average region-wide. So this is good news for people who are homeowners, but makes it incredibly difficult for people who are looking for houses or just don't have the means to purchase or rent houses at these prices. It's a little too soon to know what the long-term effects of these trends will be, but our model recognizes that we do have periods of faster and slower growth, as I mentioned before, and we believe that we will continue to be successful in growing as a region, keeping talent here, but also attracting other talent to come here. We have a really thriving downtown. We have a very strong economic base, which I know Justin's going to talk about more. We have very good suburbs like the city of Gahanna and a really strong educational base as well. So we have a lot of things going for us that will continue to keep us attractive and probably will make us grow. And so with growth, there's a lot of opportunities that come with it. As we continue to do market research in terms of what people are looking for and how they want to live, what we found out is people want more choices on where they live, how they live, and how they get around. And so in 2014, for the first time, we kind of explored different scenarios of how, as a region, we could develop to accommodate the demand. And so these are the 4 scenarios that you see here on the slide, essentially from continued sprawl in car-centric neighborhoods of the past to more compact, walkable communities where we focus on infill and redevelopment of our existing infrastructure. A few years later, we then undertook another scenario planning process where we wanted to explore what it could look like at the local level if we focused our growth along key regional corridors that then also would provide high-capacity transit. And when we talked about high-capacity transit, we didn't say it has to be light rail or bus rapid transit or autonomous vehicle technology, but we just said it has to be a vehicle that can transport a lot of people from one point to another on dedicated right-of-way. It cannot be stuck in traffic, otherwise it's not an advantage and not very competitive. And so these were the 5 corridors that were selected as part of the study. We recognize that there are others as well, especially going out to Easton and the airport closer to Gahanna too. Both studies then evaluated the costs of our growth and development choices over several metrics. So those are the metrics you see here related to traffic, fiscal impacts, the household, environmental issues as well. And all metrics really showed for both studies that if we develop in a more compact, walkable, mixed-use environments, it's going to be more beneficial on all of these metrics. Essentially, compact connected neighborhoods require less land, less energy, and fewer tax dollars compared to the sprawl-heavy trends that we saw in the 80s and 90s, all while meeting really the growing preferences of people to be closer to jobs and places and have more options to get around. It's essentially better for our health, for the health of the environment, and for our fiscal health as well. We did some analysis around specifically the corridor concepts of if we build those 5 corridors out and if we put a lot of more infill and denser development along these corridors, what would this mean for our region? And what our consultants found was that we would save about 10 billion in infrastructure cost and gain about 3 times more tax revenue per acre, and tax revenue includes sales tax, income tax, and property taxes. And essentially the reason for the savings in infrastructure is if you continue to build out, you have to build new roads, new sewer lines, you have to provide more service with police and fires, and it all costs additional money, versus if you focus your development within your community where you have vacant spots and infill opportunities, you can hook into your existing infrastructure and essentially save significant dollars that way. And since that original Inside 2050 study was revealed, we had a lot of communities, including Gahanna, kind of take hold of these findings and really think about how can we redevelop and reinvigorate our downtowns? Where do we have really focused areas that we can create more density and create these kind of walkable communities that people are looking for, with also different types of housing that is not the traditional single-family home. And I think what's really important here is that single-family homes are not going away. There's always going to be a demand for it, and this is not trying to put them away or replace them, but this is really thinking about where can we find locations that are very strategic for opportunities of infill and redevelopment, so people have options to stay here. So if you're a senior and you need to downsize, but you want to stay in your community, can you stay here because you have that housing option? And the same for your kids as they are growing older and becoming young professionals and aren't settling down yet. Can they have a place here to live and get around, step out of their doors and go to a coffee shop? The other thing I do want to say about this on the slide real quick is while we are starting to add a stronger mix of housing across the region to our footprints, we are still not building enough housing units to meet the demand. So the Building Industry Association, the BIA, estimates that we need about 14,000 housing units built a year. We're building barely 12,000, probably closer to 10,000 right now. And so when you think about supply and demand and the competition that's going on, that's exactly what we've been seeing in today's housing market. And so there are a lot of areas that relate to it. And so our partners came together about 2 years ago and said, Morpsey, can you please lead the regional housing strategy and kind of identify where we are today, what are the barriers for more housing and more access to housing, and how can we come up with action items? I presented on this probably last year to the council here in Gahanna, thinking about, are there ways that the city of Gahanna could undertake a local housing action agenda and really take this data down to the local level. There's a lot of work that has to be done, but it's definitely doable. And this would be a whole presentation on its own. A few other things before I'll turn it over to Justin or take some questions is Link Us is actually the implementation phase of the corridor concepts that I showed you earlier. The City of Columbus and CODA were so impressed by the data that this corridor concept study showed that they said, yeah, let's see how we can make it a reality. And so they're right now focusing on the Northwest Corridor and as well as West Broad Street and East Main Street, pulling in Whitehall and Bexley and Randallsburg as well, and going through the Federal Transit Administration to figure out how they can make high-capacity transit a reality along these corridors. The big thing that they will talk about, which I'm really excited, is this is not just a transit initiative, this is a mobility initiative for the region. And so they are including not just transit in it, but also greenways and trails and sidewalks, and how do you have better connectivity to the transit system and overall in the region. In Central Ohio, we approved a trail vision about 3 years ago that said, let's add 500 more miles of regional trails to Central Ohio. We have about 230 greenway miles today, which are your Allen Creek and your Big Walnut, the section that you have here and the All-in-Tangi. But there's so much more potential to kind of build this out, connect communities to that network and kind of have it serve as a backbone of an active transportation system. And so Linkus is saying, yes, let's see how we use that as a way to integrate better overall in terms of mobility. And they are also looking at housing conversations and how do we, as we are building out some of these corridors, require developers to put in a certain percentage of affordable housing so that the people that need those transportation choices the most, because they don't have access to a car or can't afford a car, can live there and really easily access jobs and have chances for higher opportunities. And the picture on the left is Rapid 5, which was an initiative that was just finished earlier this summer with the Urban Land Institute of Columbus and had some incredible visions developed from 5 design firms around each of these river corridors and how it could be expanded in terms of green space to think about could we create the largest green park system in the country. And there are some really beautiful renderings for Gahanna as well and the Friendship Park site specifically. So with that, I'll end it and just wanted to let you know that there's a lot of initiatives that are going on that really will support Gahanna, but the region as a large. And I want to make sure that you all know that MORPC is here as a resource. We have a technical assistance program that can be tapped into. We have mobility and development initiatives. As you can see, we have a lot of data and mapping services that we can provide to your planning efforts as well. By the way, just side note, congratulations to Gahanna too for passing a complete streets policy a few years back. I think that's such an important step towards creating this more walkable, bikeable environment, and all the efforts that are going on in Gahanna already with Creekside and the new library and US 62 as a corridor and the focus areas you have here. I think you should all feel really good about what's happening here, and being part of those conversations is really, really critical as well. So with that, I'll end my presentation, but if you guys have any questions for me now or later, happy to answer them.
We do have a roving mic available, or you can walk up to the podium if you have any media questions. Courtney is dying to use the roving mic.
All right. Thank you.
As we switch over, I'll introduce Justin Bickle, Managing Director for Client Services and Project Management for One Columbus. I've known Justin personally since I reached the region here about 6+ years ago. One of my first experiences in my prior role was traveling with Justin internationally. I'll save those stories for a different time and a different venue. But know that his passion for economic growth and opportunity knows no bounds or country boundaries, for that matter. It was a wonderful trip, it was a wonderful experience, and a truly bonding one, so I was thrilled when Justin accepted to join us this evening. So with that, hey JB, come on up, buddy.
We good here? Right here? Left, right? Okay, great.
Sure. IT's struggling right now.
That's okay. It's probably user error on my part.
I have marked it speaker 2.
Well, as we're pulling it up, I think it's important for me to kind of just tell a couple little quick stories. As Mayor Jadwin mentioned, I did spend some time here, and I saw Mr. Renner when I walked in, who I haven't seen in about 5 years, and since then I've had 3 kids, 2 in the last 15 months, so we've been busy. But Gahanna always has kind of held a pretty special place in my heart. My wife and I got married in 2009, and this is where we bought our first home. And we spent 7 years here, which is the longest amount of time I've lived somewhere since I lived with my parents before I graduated high school. And I may or may not, about a half a dozen times a year, drive by my old house to make sure that it's still being well kept, because I put a lot of effort in there, and I think take a lot of pride in being a former resident of Gahanna and spending quite a few years on the CIC and contributing here, so it's always nice to come back. And I also spent some time 5 years coaching basketball at Columbus Academy. So I did a lot in my 7 years here. Was very enjoyable. So wanted to make sure that I provided a little bit of personal experience here in Gahanna. So it's always great to have the opportunity to come back here and see some faces I haven't seen for a while and talk a little bit about what we do. Nate reached out a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure I was option C or maybe even D. but here we are, last on the roster. So I think maybe what would probably be important, we'll talk a little bit about, and I'll tie a couple things into what Kirsten mentioned as far as what One Columbus focuses on and what we're really charged with and our vision and what we're striving to be and achieve here in our next 10 years, which we're in the middle of that right now. Show of hands, anybody hear of or know of Columbus 2020, our first entity? Okay, great, awesome. So founded in 2010, Kenny McDonald's been our CEO the entire time, which I think in economic development world is significantly important, especially when you have a clear vision and you've delivered on that vision and you have really good partnerships with both the state and local partners and all of our civic partners here across the region. I think consistency is unique in economic development. Usually people have to move around and try to accomplish different things in different places, and I think that consistency is great to have for our organization and the region as a whole. So really excited about the 10 years we're in right now, albeit we've got off to an odd start in the middle of a pandemic and tried to pivot here and there. But I think what I want to spend a little time on what Nate asked me to do is talk about just level set of what our focus is really quickly. Talk a little bit about what we exist to do really when you cut through all the services, all of the client focused things that we deliver, and how we do that with our partners, both at Jobs Ohio and at the local level. And then finally, utilizing some of the tools that we do use, and which we have very recently with Nate and Emily and Courtney on various levels here in Gahanna over the last couple of months to close a deal. So to bring a project to the region, creating new jobs, investment, new payroll, or help a company expand that's already here in the community as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in these next few slides. Really quickly, so our first 10 years were really carved out for us before any of us were even hired at Columbus 2020, and of course now One Columbus. That name had an expiration date, so the name changed. So I think we've got something consistent here where we don't have to change it in 2030 or 2040 or 2050. Hopefully we'll still be around then. The new vision is very specific in outlining what our objective is. And I think some recent events at the leadership level are going to help us accomplish that through really utilizing the people that we share a suite with, the Columbus Partnership, becoming more of one whole economic development entity, striving to become the most prosperous region in the United States. You know, we recently had a strategy session, and we've talked about before of, you know, Columbus doesn't have a thing. You know, Austin's got a thing, Nashville's got a thing, these other markets have a thing. I don't think we need a thing. You know, this can be our thing. You know, there are certain things that we're measuring our achievements and our accomplishments against to become the most prosperous region in the United States. But I think some of the things that Kirsten talked about specifically, when we talk about equity, when we talk about inclusion, talk about affordable housing, being competitive and providing opportunity for people from all different walks of life is going to help us get there. So I wanted to make sure that I stated the new vision for everyone, which is really driving our activity here as we get through this next decade. There's four core sort of pillars, and that is to sustain our economic momentum, develop, inspire, attract a talented, adaptive, and diverse workforce, enable the innovation capacity, and increase global identity and connectivity. I think the visual here helps a little bit show who we serve. Kirsten showed the Morpsey area, which I think is 8 counties. Is that right? It's 15. I saw one, I was counting 8, sorry. 15 counties, so our focus is 11. You know, so we go all the way up to Logan County and Bellefontaine, to the northwest, north as far as Marion and Morrow counties, Knox County, Licking, Fairfield, Pickaway, and kind of make that circle and loop. So that is our responsibility. That are those 11 counties and all of our local partners and municipalities that fall within that sort of territory. The map on the right shows you our service territory in relation to our other network partners that are part of Jobs Ohio, which I'm sure everyone's heard Jobs Ohio, who's been online roughly, a year after we came online in 2010, but is a significant partner in us being able to deliver some of these things that we're going to talk about here about closing a deal, winning an opportunity, and then fostering that opportunity into something more beyond just a site location decision. What we do a number of things. We are very vertically integrated. So when you think about an opportunity and developing one, creating one, and then ushering it through the process, end-to-end services. So we have customized research capabilities internally, where we provide analysis and regional labor market data. Real estate identification, so we can identify real estate, whether it's a greenfield site or an existing building for a client. Incentives sourcing, both on the state and local levels, and in some instances, federal. Workforce training and recruitment resources, facilitate connections, marketing and communications, and event support. That last bullet point we'll get to do here with Nate and team in a few weeks. So I think in order to kind of give you some perspective on how we find opportunities, we talk about closing a deal. Okay, well, how do you get a deal? I'm going to talk a little bit about opportunity generation, evaluation, and management. Not a one-size-fits-all approach. The way that One Columbus sources opportunities is multifaceted. We self-source, and we do that through those internal research capabilities. So Jung Kim, Juliet Hall, primarily doing global business activity monitoring, taking a look at the the companies in our region, monitoring their earnings calls, acquisitions, mergers, and then we will develop a targeted marketing business development strategy around that for companies that are not here in the region, that we don't have a relationship with, but are somewhere else in the world. So pre-pandemic, as everyone could imagine, we spent a lot of time on the coasts. Very expensive markets, providing this as a cost alternative and a better place to do business as you continue to grow your core operations beyond your means in California, to be specific, and New York and the East Coast. We also utilize third-party lead generation. So we contract with a firm who does some of that calling and cold calling for us to get us the foot in the door. And then it's up to us to go meet with that company, to go showcase the justification for them to consider this market as a growth market, to expand, relocate to, or grow into, and develop into an opportunity. Referral, that can come from any different level. It could come from local partner, it could come from an accounting firm, it could come from one of our financial institution partners who serves a client that they have an account with, who's contemplating a financial decision or a personnel decision, and contact us. Existing industry visits. Now for Gahanna, it's significantly important to first and foremost understand the challenges, objectives, mitigate risk, and provide opportunity for the companies that are here in the community specifically. And the projects that we do win, most of them come from our existing business. Company direct, so a company may call us directly with an opportunity, whether they're here or somewhere else in the world, where they have a growth opportunity that they are considering the Columbus market for expansion. And then finally, site location professionals who may be representing those companies and kind of speaking on their behalf, going about the site location process and market evaluation. So how we evaluate an opportunity, what defines a project for us? We have to first establish a but-for provision. And by that, we mean but for state and or local incentives, XYZ company would not do ABC project in Ohio. We have to establish that competitive factor. Otherwise, we'd be incentivizing everyone and just sending proposals out every hour of the day. So we first have to establish that provision. Secondly, is it competitive? And by that, I mean not intra-regionally, but somewhere else around the country. A company who may be here already or somewhere else in the world, what are the other markets they're taking a look at for this? Are they talking about relocating if they're already here? Are they talking about spinning out a line of business and putting it in some other sister facility in another portion of the United States? Or what other drivers for their geographic needs kind of fall within here, this competitive factor? Is it in a targeted industry? I don't know if I'm going to remember all 9 off the top of my head, but we're talking about manufacturing, aviation and aerospace, fintech, financial services, insurance, healthcare. And in healthcare, we're talking specifically about core operations. We're not talking about Central Ohio Primary Care or Ohio Health or things like that. We're talking about life sciences, biotech, headquarters, back office, front office type operations. And I'm going to skip over the rest and move on to the next one.
Got 3.
I repeated myself here. Is it economic base? So again, kind of playing on the distinction I just made about what we mean by healthcare. We don't work on any retail, commercial type, storefront, restaurant, residential projects. Those are not what we consider economic base. And to be specific, when we look at those targeted industries and we work with those companies, they are creating revenue that is then just dispersed outwardly into the rest of the world. Whereas those other non-economic base entities, whether it's retail, restaurant, they are creating and generating sales and revenue that's recirculated throughout a community. That's the distinction there between economic base. And then it creates net new jobs, payroll, capital investment, pretty simply stated. You've probably seen where we've worked on massive projects, but we also work on projects where a minimum of 10 net new jobs are being considered. So the whole gamut. And then outlier opportunities would be, on the rare instance, we've talked a lot about net new jobs. There are instances where a company is possibly at risk of completely relocating because of a number of factors, and we're able to utilize some of these programs in order to help sort of mitigate any type of costs that may incur with their operation. It's a constraint to doing business where they are currently in our region. And how do we manage an opportunity? So, significantly important to establish a timetable to deliver, and it's really dependent upon what stage they engage us. They could engage us just to talk about incentives because they've done all the other legwork. They could engage us at the very beginning of the stage where they are 6 to 12 months out from even having a defined project, but they're going through the market data collection and the evaluation, and they've contacted us to kind of piece that together with the other competitive markets that they may be considering. Communicating and identifying objectives with Jobs Ohio and our local partners, so it's very quick. We need to understand what the challenges, objectives, and timeline are. And in order to get those things done, we can't do them without our partnership with Jobs Ohio and our local partners. Due diligence, and this we're talking very specifically about understanding what's been going on with the company. If we do know their name. Sometimes we don't know their name for a couple of months until we've signed non-disclosures and we've maybe made it past the first phase. But doing the due diligence on the company, what sort of habits have they been undertaking, or have they been doing any mergers and acquisitions? What sort of things have they been doing domestically or internationally that we need to understand in order for us to be better competitive and better serve and incentivize? And have a transparent dialogue, both with our state and local partners, but also the company on the process and the timing, the expectations, and manage those expectations. And then lastly, determining the best path to success and actually delivering on that, which is really critically important. Now, to talk pretty quickly here about utilizing those incentives for those competitive opportunities. The criteria for assessing the need and meeting those client objectives, we need to understand what challenges, what risk the company's undertaking, and the timetable that they're working under. I think it's very important to state that there are no two projects that are viewed the same. So you may have two separate projects where a company's got 25 jobs each. They're $100,000 a piece, and they're investing $2 million. There's no carbon copy template that says they get that and they get that. There are a number of factors that are part of the consideration as far as why one may get more than the other. And it may be real estate driven. It may be workforce or personnel driven. It may be just specifically cost. There's a methodology and a calculation that kind of spits out and says, yeah, this is what the ROI is on this calculation for this type of project. But again, we're going to be intelligent about the way we evaluate these opportunities. And at the end of the day, we're going to do what we need to do in order to be successful. Another criteria is the project location that's being considered in Ohio. You know, I can tell you very specifically if a company is looking in the Columbus region or looking in Southeast Ohio, two very contrasts, very different regions, very different economies, very different type of workforces and challenges. If it comes down to it, one gets eliminated and the other one's still kind of in the game from a competitive factor, the incentive package could possibly be larger in a different part of the state because of these intangible things that are not consistent among the different regions. And then lastly, identifying advantages and disadvantages to those other competing markets if we do know those. So there's two things that we may not know for a while: who it is and who we're competing against. Jobs Ohio incentive programs, there's a number of them, and they've grown over the years. They're sort of platform of programs that we can leverage. Whereas in the beginning and sort of the legacy ODOD programs, it was sort of, this is what we have. Sorry if it doesn't work for you, but this is our incentive offer. These grants, loans, tax incentives enable us, again, going back to not do a carbon copy. They give us the opportunity to understand a company's challenges, understand a community's challenges and needs and objectives, and be able to take these programs and sort of mix and match and play a little shell game, and very openly, as I mentioned on a couple of slides before them, have a transparent dialogue as to why we're putting this incentive proposal in front of you and why it would work in that community. There's economic development grant for fixed asset investment in real personal property. There's a growth fund loan, which is a very low interest loan. Jobs Ohio kind of prefers to take a secondary position, not a lead position, over a financial institution that may be a partner here in the region. There's a research and development center grant. That is to attract new R&D money and capital and people that are being brought to the state, not a double down of what's already here. So it's something that entices companies to do something new as part of their operation here. Revitalization program, which I think is significantly important to communities, especially that may be landlocked, that have some legacy industrial and office buildings, where they get somebody that comes to the market and is taking a look at that real estate, but there's a big chunk of money to bite off in order to get that up to their standard to be able to operate in. So we can utilize this and kind of indirectly benefits the community. Workforce training grant based on employees' wages while being trained. And then the talent acquisition services. So everybody knows the challenges that we have across the board, no matter what the industry, no matter what the sector, whether it's economic base or not, on talent and workforce. And this program specifically meets some of the challenges that a company may have in making a decision in Ohio or in this market based on a few different occupations that they may need to onboard and the timing that they do that. This program is not a duplicate program of what a company's already doing, but it kind of finds where we can make an impact and customize a talent strategy and a talent program that lasts about 18 months, and then that plan is kind of delivered back to the company for them to utilize at the end of the day. And then on the state of Ohio side, so the public side, so we've got Jobs Ohio, who we are a network partner of, but we also work with the state of Ohio, whether it's through that relationship with Jobs Ohio and their relationship with the, I guess, newly minted Ohio Department of Development, back to their old name. They have a number of programs that are very significantly impactful. And I can see two here on this one that I worked with Nate and Emily on a company here in Gahanna that we're going to announce here in a few weeks. But the Job Creation Tax Credit's a very traditional program It's based on payroll. It's performance-based and refundable. Data center tax exemption is relatively new, speaking of these other programs. I mean, it's, data centers are massive investments. So if a company is going to come in and invest over $100 million, there's a specific tax exemption on the equipment and everything that we can put in front of them to kind of reduce that burden. Loan and bond funds, these are very traditional, whether it's the 166 Direct or a couple of other programs. And then roadwork development funds. And this one specifically, I think, is important to every community who has an opportunity where a company's coming in and is building something new, whether it's a new office, a new industrial building, or expanding one, and there are impacts on the infrastructure that directly feed the access points to those properties. So we can utilize this in the justification of a company's project benefiting the community. Whereas it kind of acts as a pass-through. And we're able to then provide a grant that reduces the overhead that a community might have to spend on a turn lane, a curb cut, a new traffic light, et cetera. Those are the competitive programs. Recently, Jobs Ohio has rolled out a few non-competitive, so we don't need that but-for. A couple of them are very community-based and product-based, and by that I mean sites and buildings. And then there's one other that I worked with Courtney and Nate on recently too. This is the Inclusion Grant. The first one is the Inclusion Grant, and this one's non-competitive. We could probably spend quite a bit of time on this, but the way it works is it identifies a company and their eligibility first based on their zip code. In the state of Ohio, there are 98 distressed zip codes. Gahanna's not one of them. However, the way that we can qualify here is for women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses. We talked about this economic base versus non-economic base. This program blurs that line. Even for someone like me that's been doing this for so long, I have to ask 7, 8 times out of 10 if XYZ company qualifies for this, and more times than not they do. So